renaming. And then
I'm doing attendance.
Perfect. So we've got attendance covered, and we'll do our AI recording. That really helps our secretary if we have to look back on what happened, and then Mike will hit record. So if you want to go ahead and start that anytime, Mike, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and start the meeting. All right, we should be up. Good. Well, welcome everyone to our January 25th Global Travelers E-Club meeting. We have several new folks today or guests that are here. We're really pleased that you're joining us today. So our mission, we travel together, serve the world, meet people, and have fun. And I really think that our mission and the wonderful people that have come together in this club is why we all are having such a positive experience and doing so much good in the world. And that keeps us coming back and new people finding our club. So for those of you brand new, we are an e-club that is hosted or sponsored out of Minnesota, District 5950, but we have members and associates from all over the world. If you're interested in being a member, Paula is our contact for membership. Her email is there, and please put your full name and your email in the chat, and the membership committee can follow up with you. And again, you might be a guest, and that's great as well. When we're going through the meeting, please just mute yourself and then put your questions in the chat. That helps us manage when we have a lot of people on the meeting. So our agenda, you can see there. And this is our typical meeting agenda. We're very much like a regular Rotary meeting in that we get a lot done. We just can do it from wherever we're living, working, or playing tonight. And I want to welcome our new member, Deborah Francis from North Carolina. Do you want to say hello, Deborah, so we all see you on our screen?
Hi, everybody. I'm told I'm probably the first member from North Carolina.
I think so. And where did you hear about Global Travelers, Deborah?
At Addis Ababa in Ethiopia.
So it's very fitting. She was a traveler on a different tour that heard that we were Rotarians, and she's a Rotarian, and the rest is history, right?
Yes.
So it's especially fitting we welcome you tonight, since we're going to be talking about Ethiopia. So no matter where we go, we typically will end up finding people that love our mission and want to be a part of our club. So welcome, Deborah. We're really glad you're with us. And a little bit about where our global travelers. So there were a number of us that just got back from a Rotary Youth Exchange conference in Merida, Mexico. So one of the fun things, and in that first picture on the left, is that Herman lives in Merida, one of our members. So she met up with myself and Ingrid, and we got a chance to walk around her city. And then other members of Global Travelers that were there includes Bill, of course, Mike and I, Kelly, Jackie, Eric, Marcus, Becky Fontaine were there. They're not in the photo, but lots of our Global Travelers got together and were attending and working on behalf of Rotary Youth Exchange. And then Rick was in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, and obviously making Rotary friends there. So we love to get your photos and know where in the world Global Travelers are going. Now, our Meet the Member is Valdi Stephenson. And so I'm going to let Valdi introduce himself for a couple of minutes, and I'll advance his slides while he does that. So Valdi, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I wanted to, let's go to the first slide. I think we're on 2 or 3 now.
You are on it.
Let's go to the first slide.
Yeah, and I just inserted it into ours, so this was your first slide that you had. And if not, just go from here.
All right, no, we'll go with this. We'll go with this. I'm from the St. Paul Club, Club 10, and we were invited to Guyana because there was a paucity of projects. This is back in the early 90s. And we had quite a few projects in Guyana. The one that I'm featuring here on this page is a jungle village, Amerindian village. Most people in Guyana live along the coast. We had to take a speedboat 2 hours to go upstream to provide clean water. And a second trip, we provided some school supplies. What a fantastic opportunity for these children. And we sure had some fun. Next slide, please. We were featured in the Rotarian magazine on that trip, and that picture, I'm handing out pens. I actually took pens from households that I visited, and the kids just thought that was great. I was like the Pied Piper on that trip. Next slide, please. We've also served in Nicaragua. The apparatus you see on the left is chlorine tablets. They are food grade. And in Nicaragua, in the mountains, they simply collect mountain runoff and put it in these big cement cisterns. And an outfit, a nonprofit in Iowa, developed this very simple system. You could see valves, and that canister holds chlorine tablets. And every day they go and they test, like your swimming pool, they test the chlorine level and improve the quality of the water. A great project. We did that. I'm sure there was a dozen district grants with that. Next one, please. Our objective is to find a good NGO. You know, we gave up on Guyana. It was so corrupt. We finally left and moved on to Bolivia. You'll recognize the name Mano a Mano because Global Travelers co-sponsored a water well that was in a meeting about 3 years ago. Our club has had a dozen projects with them. Here you see a picture of unused Minnesota medical supplies. There's 3 containers leave St. Paul about every 4 months. And boy, it's doing a lot of good down there. Next slide. Our feature project was a water reservoir. Water comes off those mountains in the background, and it was just flowing away, you know, right past these farm fields. And with climate change and the drying of the land, we simply impounded some of that water and pump it onto fields. The farmers pay a fee for some of that water you see flowing. What a wonderful project. It has transformed that entire region. It's grown to several other global grants associated with that water in that particular area of central Bolivia. Next slide. This is an example of the corn crop. When we went to visit one time, they showed us their yield and they laid it out on the main street in town. My favorite picture is the one to the right. These are the village elders in that community. This was our 3rd trip there. And I remember on our first trip, we came in there and they're looking at this white-haired gringo from Minnesota telling them that we're going to change their lives. And they weren't, they were polite to me. Let's just say that. The second trip, they started to see the yields that they were getting. And the picture shown here is the 3rd trip. And now we're featured guests of the community. And I was able to hold hands with that lady there, and it just showed, you know, the growth of their community and their respect, you know, for Rotary. Okay, my last slide next. I was awarded the Service Above Self award, and I was very proud of that. I took a picture on the right of my lapel on my suit. So it was one of the highlights of my Rotary career to receive that award. And we're not slowing down at all. So I look forward to working with all of you in Global Travelers, and let's craft and create some good projects. I'm a mentor and have been for 20 years of the grants team in our district. So that's my passion, and I hope to see some good results and great projects coming forward.
Wonderful. Thank you, Valdi. It's so interesting to learn about all the different expertise in our club. That's one of the great things about our club is we have people from all different professions and experience in service, and also many of you who are associate members are coming from great clubs that we can also learn from and partner with. So great to have you in our club.
Thank you.
All right, so I am going to stop sharing because Jeelan's going to be sharing her PowerPoint. And Mike, have you made her a co-host? If not, I will. I'm going to change that. Let's see if we can.
Are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me switch to there. How's that?
Perfect.
Great.
Okay, I'm going to try to cram 2 very, very full weeks into 20 minutes or so. We were in Ethiopia.
It's a big presentation. So if you go a little over, you have my permission.
Okay, well, it was an amazing trip. It was an exhausting trip. We did a north loop, which was kind of the history loop, and a south loop, which was more of the cultural, seeing the tribes. It was quite a trip. And I want to give kudos to our daring dozen. There were 12 of us who went on the trip. As Melanie said, we mastered the F word, which stands for flexibility, because it challenged all of us. Jim and I counted, we've been to Africa 8 times, and Ethiopia was our 13th country in Africa. And this was by far the most challenging trip. It was partly because the agenda was so tight, partly because the roads were terrible. It was emotionally difficult in the South because there's so much poverty. It was just a challenging trip. I think we're all really glad we went and not in a hurry to go back because we came home exhausted. People have asked me, Mike asked me when I first proposed this trip, why Ethiopia? And my answer was basically because I haven't been there. And it looks interesting, and it definitely was interesting. And we also made wonderful connections, as we'll talk about. And I want to do a little tip of the hat to Alana because I used a lot of her photojournalism. She posted on Facebook regularly and had lots of pictures, and that really helped me to remember all the things that we've done. So just a little bit of Ethiopia context. Physically, Ethiopia is about the size of the state of Alaska. It has 129 million people, which is roughly the combined population of our 5 most populous states. So think about cramming the people from California, Texas, Florida, and New York into Alaska, and you get a sense of the population density. So there were many places where there weren't a lot of people, but there weren't a lot of wide open spaces. There were villages, there were people herding cows kind of everywhere we went. It's a very young population. The median age is just under 19 years, and almost 20% of the population is under 15. The birth rate is 4. And if you know your numbers, you know that the rate for kind of sustaining your population is a little over 2, like 2.2 or 2.3. So they're at 4. So it's obviously a very growing population, and it is so poor. In the cities, the poverty rate is 40%. In the rural areas, it's pushing 80%. It's just an incredibly poor country. Some of that is history. Some of that is, it's a very, particularly in the South, it's very, very dry, and they've had lots of droughts. It's very difficult. And it was emotionally difficult to see all of that. Just as a contrast, our poorest state in the United States is Mississippi, and the poverty rate there is 19.2%. So even in the urban areas, it's basically double what it is in Mississippi. So it's a very poor country. Some of us came in early and did some sightseeing ahead of time, but our trip started out with a bang. It was Rotary Day, because this is when we could arrange with the local Rotary group to share with us the projects that they're working on. So in the morning, we visited a school that has been a project for the Addis Rotary Club for a number of years. This school is in a very, very poor part of Addis Ababa and has about 1,300 students, and I think they said 33 classrooms. So the students take turns being in class, I guess. It's amazing. And their kids are hungry. So the local Rotary Club had a project 7 or 8 years ago to provide breakfast and lunch for the kids in the schools. And then the Ethiopian government took that over, and they're now providing breakfast and lunch in schools around the country. So then the Rotary Club said, well, they're doing breakfast and lunch, but these kids also don't have any food at home. They don't have food on the weekends. They don't have food in the summer when schools are not in session. So they decided that what they wanted to do was build a sustainable approach to feeding the kids and filling in those gaps. So they decided to build a commercial bakery in the school where they could employ some of the mothers of these poor kids to bake bread, provide it to the kids for their dinners, for their weekends, for the summers, and also sell some of the excess supply to the community to raise funds to buy materials to make the next day's bread. So they bought commercial ovens, they bought commercial mixing things, and they were all ready to go, and then COVID hit. So now they have the commercial ovens, they have kind of a commercial kitchen ready to go, but they don't have the funding for the materials to really get it off the ground because it obviously won't be sustaining for a while. So they're really hoping that we will partner with them on this project, and we have a proposal from them that we're looking at. So this would be potentially a global grant and seems to make a lot of sense, especially as something that's sustainable. So that was our first morning. Then in the afternoon, let me talk a little bit more about the school. Here are the kids. And Jim and I hauled this heavy black suitcase down in the lower left full of school supplies. That was part of the $500 that our club committed to providing to various groups that we met with in Ethiopia. And they were excited to have those supplies to hand out to the kids. We had soccer balls that the labels bought. Up in the upper left, you can see they dressed up some of the kids in native costumes to meet with us and talk to us. And they were just so excited that we were there. You can see these hordes of kids that were out in the courtyard and were just thrilled to see these Americans that were there. They were happy that we cared about them. And you can see the wonderful goals that they're trying to develop for the kids. So these kids from poor backgrounds and hungry, they're still trying to instill in them a sense of honesty and justice and self-discipline and care for the public and love for their country and so on. After we met with them and had a tour, then we had a kind of a social event, and they're very big on coffee ceremonies. So it's a very important social and community event for them. They roast the beans and they have them on a dish, and they go around and have everyone smell them, kind of like smelling incense, except you're smelling coffee. And then they had bread. So this is the kind of bread that they will be making in this commercial kitchen that they have. And you can see that it's not Wonder Bread. It's much more substantial and nutritious than some of the bread that we have in the United States. So it will be giving kids some protein and some real sustenance if they can deliver this kind of bread to the kids. So we had samples of the bread, we had coffee, we had other snacks, and had a wonderful social time with them. Then in the afternoon, we visited a second place, which is called the Hamlin Fistula Hospital. And I don't know how much all of you know about fistula. Many of us didn't know a lot about it, but it's a horrible complication of childbirth that is unfortunately prevalent in countries like Ethiopia and other countries in Africa. It is caused typically by either really prolonged labor that should have been a cesarean section, or by a very young mother who's unfortunately old enough to get pregnant, but her body's really not old enough to have a successful pregnancy and childbirth. And what happens is they get a hole in their bladder as a result of this complication, and so they leak urine. Um, and it's, you know, it's horrible. And then they get ostracized by their community because they smell and leak urine. So these women who have suffered a horrible childbirth, often lost their baby because of the long childbirth, then get ostracized and put in some shed in the corner of the village. So it's a really very horrible thing that this hospital is working to correct and ultimately to prevent. But they physically help these women. They perform surgery and do physical therapy and so on. But they also have a very holistic approach. So they do occupational therapy. Many of these women are illiterate, and they teach them to read and write. They teach them the basics of some basic financial stuff, teach them some kind of skill like embroidery, for example, and really try to get them to the point where they can re-enter society. And they've been very successful. And they are a teaching hospital. So the approach that they take is being adopted around Africa. So they have doctors from around Africa who come to this hospital to learn their techniques. We brought, one of the things we brought, you can see Melanie on the left, we brought fistula kits, which are basically kind of like menstrual pads for these women to wear until their incontinence problems are corrected. One of our associate members, and I didn't see Christine here tonight, but Christine Martin is from the St. Louis Park in Minnesota Club. And she's been working with a doctor at the University of Minnesota who is Ethiopian on a possibility of a grant to do some work in this hospital, probably focused on education of other doctors. So that's one that probably we as a club would partner with them, but the St. Louis Park Club is going to take the lead on that one. So we had we all kind of at the end of the day, at that first day, we were kind of like, wow, this is a lot and it's exciting and there's so many possibilities. So our heads were churning. And then the next morning we had a little bit more serene experience. We drove up to the mountain that overlooks Addis and visited a palace and a church and a monastery that was the home of Menelik II, who was Emperor of Ethiopia at the end of the 19th century into 1913, is considered to be the founder of modern Ethiopia. We heard a lot about Ethiopian history, and I don't know if any of us could really unravel all that we heard. But anyway, we knew Menelik II was a very important emperor in Ethiopia. You can see that the church, which is in the upper left and the lower right, is a very different shape from what we're accustomed to. This is an Ethiopian Orthodox church, which is what most of the people in the north part of the country practice. It's their Ethiopian Orthodox, which is like Eastern Orthodox. The church has an outer part, which is what you see kind of under the overhang, and then a second part inside that the congregates can enter, and then an inner sanctum that only the clergy can enter, which is typical of Orthodox churches. On the right is a priest. So we saw monks and we saw priests. And like everyone in the north of Ethiopia, he was so friendly and willing to talk to us and explain kind of what he did and what he was wearing and so on. They were just very happy that we were there and happy to talk to us. And in the lower left, you see this, we were up on a mountain. This is a view of Addis. And it reminds me a lot of what Los Angeles used to look like in the 1970s before they got the smog more under control than it is today. So Addis air quality is not great. Partly automobiles, partly the fuel that they burn to heat their homes and so on. But it is, it's pretty smoggy. Not as bad as Delhi, but it's pretty smoggy. The next day, or that afternoon, sorry, we had the opportunity to participate in Timkat, which is their religious celebration of Epiphany. It was, I can take credit for the fact that we were there on Epiphany, but it was really just kind of luck that this was when we scheduled it and this was our first day. And because it happened to fall on a weekend, it was a many-day long celebration. It was incredible. People, you can see there are literally throngs of people. I have never in my life seen so many people in so many different costumes, all singing, dancing, happy, filling the streets. It was just an amazing, amazing experience. And then you can see we're there on the upper right. We were part of the crowd that was following the official participants. So there were thousands and thousands and thousands of people in the streets. And it's kind of a processional where it ends in the symbolic Jordan River where Jesus was baptized, and that's what they're celebrating. There were musical instruments. You can see the horn in the middle and the bottom, and then there's a big drum. And you can see that in the middle, the guys with the rug. So those red carpets that were on the street for the celebrants, they didn't have anywhere near enough of them for the full street. So these guys in the orange jackets would go and pick up the rug, roll it up, and they'd run to the front to lay it down before the group got there. And they didn't, if you were in their way, you got decked. So a few of us got rammed a little bit with rugs as part of this, but it was just an amazing experience. It was like Mardi Gras on steroids, I guess. It was so many people, and they were so excited and so happy. It was quite something. Then we left Addis and took a very short flight to Bahir Dar. I think normally this would have been a drive, but because there is still unrest, there are rebels and soldiers who occasionally have conflict in the north. So we flew instead of drove. Our group had discussions several times before we went about whether we should go because of the conflict. And 12 of us decided, yep, we were going to go. As Bill Fox said, it was a little outside our comfort zone, but we all went. And in general, we felt pretty safe. We had one experience. We were in a hotel in Gondar up on a mountaintop. So it was kind of like a fortress. And there were soldiers all around with guns, kind of looking out over the hill and making sure that nobody was attacking the hotel, it seemed like. And then all of a sudden, there were all these extra soldiers in different uniforms at the hotel, which made us a little nervous because we thought, well, maybe they know something that we don't. But it actually turned out they were there because, as Debbie found out, the president of Ethiopia was at our hotel. And so they were there to protect him and the mayor, but it was the president of Ethiopia. So that was kind of our experience. The one other experience, when we were driving in the north, periodically there would be checkpoints where sometimes it was a soldier, sometimes it was the rebels would string a wire across the road, and we would have to stop. And sometimes they'd peek in the bus and see a bunch of old white Americans, or some of us not so old, and say it's okay to go. Sometimes they would expect a bribe from our driver. One time, our driver got out and gave them money, and they went into some little hut and came back with a stamped receipt for the bribe. So that was an interesting experience. But anyway, we went as part of going to the north, we flew to Bahir Dar. We had a lovely hotel on Lake Tan, which is the largest lake in Ethiopia. So you can see our hotel in the lower right. Lake Tan is the source of the Blue Nile. And the Nile River is interesting in Africa. And many of you went to Egypt and heard from the Egyptian side the story. There are water rights that were decided, I believe, in 1959, which give Egypt about 80% of the water rights for the Nile, and Sudan the other 20%. Ethiopia gets none. But 1,500 miles of the Nile run through Ethiopia in the Blue Nile. So, and Ethiopia is pretty water starved, so they are talking about building a dam, and Egypt's pretty worried about that. But anyway, Lake Tan is the source of the Blue Nile. We had a beautiful hotel on Lake Tan, and we had a wonderful boat ride. There are a number of islands in the middle of the lake that have these incredible monasteries and churches that were built in the 16th century. And these pictures, incredibly preserved, bright, bright paintings from inside one of the churches that we visited. Just amazing. Then we went to Gondar, and it was still kind of a celebration of the Epiphany of Timcat, again, because it was a long weekend. So on the left, you'll see they fill the moat of this building specifically for this celebration. And I guess little boys jumping in and swimming is kind of reenacting baptism. They were just having a blast. There were a few girls, but it was mostly young men and little boys who were swimming. But you can see all the people. It was just tons and tons of people there watching and participating in this ceremony. We then went to visit something called the Royal Enclosure, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. In the 17th century, one of the emperors of Ethiopia, they'd typically been a nomadic culture, and he decided to settle down, that he was tired of uprooting and living in tents. And he also had had enough exposure to Europeans and to Egyptians and so on that he wanted to show them that Ethiopia could be as cool as they are. So he built this amazing residence, the Royal Enclosure, and you can see some of it. Some of it's in ruins and some of it is pretty well preserved. And because Timcat was still going on, there were a lot of people there, and a lot of young women and girls were dressed in similar fabric. And I never could get an exact answer, but they're either sisters or groups of friends who all kind of went to the fabric store and decided this is what we're going to wear, or they had a native costume like these three young women in the middle. And you notice their hair, and it's kind of hard to see, but they have very, very tight braids in the front, and then it bushes out. And when we were at the meeting in Addis, there was a young woman at the meeting who had hair like that because she was going to her sister's wedding. So I asked her about it, and she said it takes 4 hours to do that. They go to a beautician who does it, and it hurts a lot to do those braids. You can also see on the right there was this niche in the palace where you apparently renewed your wedding vows. So here are Melanie and Mike renewing their vows. This is a church that was, again, 17th century, but has been restored. And there we all are, the women of the group. We all had to wear scarves to go into any of the churches. We also had to take off our shoes. The men had to take off their shoes too, and the men had to take off their hats. Brad didn't think that was fair, but anyway, you can see the shape of the church is really different than our churches, but it has that same concept of the outer section, then the inner, and then the inner, which we couldn't go to. On the right, that looks like bamboo, but it's actually eucalyptus that they use to line the roof. Eucalyptus is not native to Ethiopia, but it was introduced and now it's really invasive. We have more interesting paintings on the wall and the roof. And on the right, you can see in that bin, there are walking sticks. And they're actually leaning sticks because their church services are many hours long. And so people who have trouble standing for that long lean on a stick. Another place that we visited in Gondar was a Falasha village, a village of Jews that is no longer houses Jews because the Jews are no longer in Ethiopia. As is so often the case in history, when horrible events happen like a famine and, like a drought and a famine, people in power look for a scapegoat, and the scapegoat is often the Jews, and that's what happened in Ethiopia. And the international community, particularly the community in Israel, became very worried and eventually launched several operations in the mid-'80s and early 1990s to airlift basically all of the Jews out of Ethiopia. Kind of surreptitiously, the Ethiopian government didn't know they were doing it ahead of time. And basically, they moved 15,000 Jews out of Ethiopia into Israel. Okay, then in Gondar, we had we met with the local Rotary Club in Gondar, and they took us to see a couple projects that they have worked on in a hospital. And in the two pictures in the upper left, they had a workshop where they built prosthetic limbs. Amazing. They would turn around in a matter of a couple days. They would do all the measurements and do the crafting that they needed to do and send somebody home with an artificial leg or an artificial foot. And they have done, I think, I forget the number, but they're hundreds. A lot of the loss of limbs is from the war. And so they have a lot of people who've lost legs as a result of the war. So there's a lot of work to be done here, and helping them do more limbs would be a possibility of a grant. So those of you who are here, who are associate members, if your home club is looking for a possibility of an international grant to do, those of us who went to Ethiopia have lots of ideas we'd be happy to share with you, because there were many things that we discovered while we were there. The other thing they did is in the lower right, the Rotary Club purchased a commercial washer and dryer so that they'd have clean linens and clean scrubs for the nurses and doctors to really help the sanitation in the hospital and reduce infections. We met with both a Rotary Club and there's a Rotaract Club. These young men in the upper right are medical students, and they're the Rotaract Club, and they have a lot of ideas as well about grants that they would like to do. Then we went to Lalibela, and this is probably the most famous thing about Ethiopia, and this is why some of us went. It was just, it's just amazing. These churches, they're called rock-hewn churches, and they were done in the late 12th and early 13th century. So they built 11 churches in 24 years, and they basically did it with a hammer and chisel. And built is really the wrong word, because the rock was there and they chiseled out around it. So it wasn't that they erected a structure, it was that they chiseled the rock away to create a structure. And to get a sense of how big these structures are, we're sitting in the lower right-hand corner in front of the structure that's above, that looks like it's in a moat. So with hammer and chisel and, I don't know, wheelbarrows or pullers or whatever, they removed all the rock around that church to create the church. Just incredible, just incredible. And there are 11 of them, and I think we visited 6. Some of them are still operating churches, like the one on the lower left that, have elaborate carpets and wall hangings and so on. Some of them are more in caves. We actually went through a very dark tunnel to get to one of the churches that was in a cave. It was kind of a creepy, scary experience for some of us, or for many of us. But it was just an amazing experience to see these churches. And then so that was our week in the north. And then we went back to Addis and went to the Rotary meeting. The Rotary Club meets twice a month. And so this was their regular meeting. It's an old club. It's a very vibrant club. They've done a lot of projects. They feel very well organized, and like they would be an excellent partner for the global grant that they would like us to work with them on. Melanie was the featured speaker for their meeting and talked about our club. And then I had the opportunity to share with them our impressions from the first half of our trip. So we as a group kind of gathered our impressions of how we felt about Ethiopia on this point, not having yet been in the South. And I'll go through a couple of them. They were such a friendly group we met so many people who were so willing to talk to us, so friendly. The northern half of the country is incredibly clean. Many of us have been to many developing countries where there's so much garbage. There was no garbage, and they were sweeping the streets all the time. It was very, very clean. We were obviously blown away by the Timcat Festival. We liked the coffee ceremony because it just seemed like it was to sit down and take time and be with your friends and neighbors in that way was a very special thing. And we were also so impressed with their resilience because this country's been through a lot. And yet people had smiles on their faces. They had plans for the future. They were hopeful. It was very impressive. And the other thing is they're very fit. They walk and walk and walk. They don't, and obviously in Addis, not so much, but when we were in the other communities, people were walking. Then we had a very, very long day to get to Arba Minch because we were supposed to split it in 2 days, but didn't because we had that Rotary meeting, but we were very glad we had that meeting. The roads are not great in the South. That's an understatement. We complain about potholes here. The roads were just one constant pothole. Plus we would have to stop for cows and goats a lot. At least once during the day, we just got out and walked a little bit because we needed to stretch because it was such a long day. And wherever we went, somehow we gathered an entourage of kids and villagers would just walk with us. They were just excited to see us. We passed markets, you can see down below. So we were out in the rural part of the country, but there are a lot of people. And we had challenges with our vehicle. That's our driver under the vehicle doing some repairs because a part of it kind of came loose, and we stopped at some place where a guy had welding equipment and he did some welding. Pretty amazing. In Arba Minch, one of our members, Debbie Kornhauser, who's pictured in the upper right, had an old friend, old acquaintance, Tom, who's also in the upper right, who is now an English teacher fellow in Arba Minch, Ethiopia. So he's working with the university on their English language program. And he and Debbie talked ahead of time about getting together with the kids to let them come and speak English to us. And we arranged to have them come for dinner at our hotel. And he brought a whole group of students. You can see them all in the lower right. And we all kind of paired off and had incredible conversations. It was wonderful. Their English is very good, but like everyone who's fairly proficient in a language, what they really need is conversation with native speakers to really take their language up a notch. So what we're hoping to do, and Debbie's working on it, but Tom, we think is funded by USAID, so we're not quite sure how this is all going to work. But we're hoping to do a service project where some of us become Zoom buddies with English students at this university and meet with them over Zoom or Facebook or something, maybe once a week for 30 minutes to have English conversation. So that's an exciting thing that we hope will come to fruition. The other thing that Tom arranged for us is there is a group called the Arba Minch Circus and Theater Group that was formed by the gentleman on the lower left, who we think was the coach of the Ethiopian gymnastics team. So he has taken a bunch of homeless kids off the street. He houses many of them in the building that you see on the lower right, not all of them, but many of them. And he has a gym. So he bought this property and he has this gym that's it's basically gymnastics mats on the floor. And he's training them to be acrobats, contortionists, performers. And they put on a show for us at the hotel the same evening that the English language students were there. It was incredible. They're just incredible performers. And he's just doing such a wonderful thing to give these homeless kids a sense of purpose and self-worth. Melanie, leave it to Melanie. We had some money from our fund that we had for things that we're doing in country. But there were many other hotel guests that were sitting watching this performance. So Melanie kind of passed the hat and went around to the various people, kind of explain what was going on and asked them to contribute. So we were able to pull together a fair amount of money for these kids which they don't normally do. They don't pass the hat when they perform a lot, and they don't really pass the hat. So maybe they learn by example. And the other thing is they have really not done much marketing. And we have these university students, some of whom are in marketing. So maybe there'll be some opportunity there to share the wealth. Then we headed further south and started visiting villages. Well, this one was on an island not far from where we were. We got in those dugout canoe things. You can see one of them's really skinny, so some of us skinny people had to go in that one, and some of the people who weren't quite as skinny went in the other one, and we did a couple different trips because we could only fit 2 or 3, and they somehow got us across the river with those sticks. It was an interesting experience, and we went to our first village, and you can see in the picture on the lower left what their homes were like. They're a common, mostly corrugated metal and eucalyptus, and not much inside, just mats to sleep on. They're living like they lived hundreds of years ago, it feels like. We visited another village that is a little bit more affluent. Most of the villages, they're nomadic people that are, they have goats and cows, and they have a few crops, but not a lot because the land is so arid. So mostly in the villages, we saw women and children because the men go out during the day and they're with the goats and the cattle. Again, this village felt a little more affluent. The clothing is more complete and doesn't look like cast off rags from the Salvation Army. All of these villages, we paid a fee to a local guide, which hopefully is shared with the community. That's the understanding, that it is shared. So when we're taking pictures of them, part of it is they're earning money by having people come and visit them and take pictures of them. Although it still felt a little creepy sometimes, but that's part of their livelihood, is to have tourists visit them. We visited another village where we did see men, and these men painted their bodies. Just because that was, and you can see Bill photobombed with the guys who painted their bodies. And you can see like the gentleman in the middle, in the center, is sitting on a little stool. And you can see in the picture in the upper right, one of them is using this little stool for headrest and the others are sitting on them. So they all the men, and in the picture in the bottom, they're all carrying their little stools. They all had these little stools. And the woman in the lower right is pounding grain or grinding grain with a stone. We think it's corn. Ooh. We visited another village where it's a sign of being loved, I guess, by being appreciated by a husband, that these women have all these necklaces, and they're very heavy. They wear them all the time. They basically can't take them off because their neck muscles have been, because the necklaces are supporting their heads, so their neck muscles have been so weakened. There are lots of kids in every village. You can see Bill over there is playing a game with the kids, and Jim down in the lower left challenged them to races. They're really fast. In all the villages, polygamy is common practice. So men have anywhere from 3 to 7 wives. They pay dowries, which to the family of the wife, typically some number of goats and cows are the dowry. In at least one village, we heard the parents pay the first dowry for the first wife. And if the man wants more than one wife, he has to pay the dowry for the second wife. And you can see in the lower right, that's what it looks like inside one of these huts. The last village we visited felt more hopeful. We're kind of back a little further north, so you can see it's a little greener. This village is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. And the people in the tribes that occupy these villages, and there's multiples, have been here for about 400 years. And their culture, they have a very strict hierarchical culture that determines who lives where in the villages. There's the inner village and the outer village. You can see our guide there is drawing pictures, kind of trying to explain to us in the circles the various parts of the village. They use terraced agriculture, and they build these stone walls. And we have Jim, who was our tallest traveler at 6'1", standing in front of a wall, so you can see how incredibly tall these walls are that they have built around and in their community. They, and on the lower left, that's an entrance to someone's house. They grow coffee, mango, soybean, sorghum, maize. They sell some. Interestingly, they don't allow their cattle to graze because they don't want to damage their agriculture. So families typically have 1 or 2 cows that live in their compound, and they bring hay to them. They're not allowed out, and there's stiff penalties if the cows are discovered grazing. And you can see with these kids standing on the hill that they're strategically located up high on hills with good views, so they've been able to protect themselves for all these years. And there are other things that we did, but our final thing we did was we went to a farewell dinner at an Abyssinian restaurant where they had traditional dancers and singers. And there are videos, if you go to Alana's website or or Facebook page, or some of the rest of us, I think, posted videos. These women spin their head around. They just shake back and forth and their hair flies, and it gave us all headaches to watch what they were doing, because they would do it over and over and over again. And they also did dances where they would kind of shake their shoulders, and it was very, very interesting and hard to do. So that was our fun-filled, exhausting, incredible 2 weeks in Ethiopia. We are all, I hope I speak for all of us, we're all really glad that we went. We learned so much. We had incredible experiences. We were all exhausted at the end. None of us is in a hurry to go back anytime soon, because it was a lot, but it was also wonderful. Many of us went on to Kenya, which felt very relaxing after we spent a week in Kenya, mostly on safari. We also met with a club in Kenya who has a strong relationship with Steve and Nancy Label, who were supposed to go with us, but ended up not being able to go. But they contributed to a project that this club did to put desks in schoolrooms. And there's a story on our website where you can read about it. So they were very excited to share with us the report about the desks that they put in this classroom and to exchange flags. So we definitely built a lot of friendships on this trip, and got a lot smarter about what's going on in Ethiopia. Okay, I will stop sharing and turn it back to you, Melanie.
Thank you, Jeelan. It was an incredible journey, and thanks to everyone. We went a little over, but there was so much learning and so many trip possibilities. So more to come if we end up doing a grant or partnering with a grant, or if somebody has a club that would like to do a grant in Ethiopia, we have the contacts. It's a great thing about our club. I'm going to go very fast through some of our other things. Our Rotary Minute is that it's Rotary's birthday this week. On the 23rd, it was 120 years old, and we're in good company. So some famous people you can see there, from Neil Armstrong to Walt Disney to John F. Kennedy and Pope Francis. So many favorite famous Rotarians in the world, and happy birthday to Rotary. Our service challenge, we have some wonderful participation, and I'd love for Judy, are you on tonight?
I am.
There you go. Do you want to say a couple words about socks and skivvies?
Yeah, I'll make it really fast. Thanks to everybody who has submitted all of the great photos. I've been amazed at the creative efforts and all of the different organizations. There has been contributions for veterans, for foster care, for the homeless, an international one. And we'll give a full report hopefully next time, but you still have a few more days to be a part of the challenge. Please send in any photos, or we just love to hear the updates of what you're doing. And thanks again to everybody that's been contributing.
Wonderful. Thank you, Judy. And I found out as I was greeting people today, not only did some people do them, but Norma said now her whole club in Florida is doing it. So if
Yes.
you have inspired your home club to collect or your neighbors, be sure to report that too, because that's all people were inspiring to do good. And then for many people, we're going to be gathering in April in Kansas City. And Lynette, any quick updates on how many people are coming? This is a big one. We've got a big group headed.
Yeah, oh, I didn't know I needed a count. Sorry, about 30.
You don't need to. I was just
about
curious.
35 people. And so I really, this is going to be great. I keep saying that. I keep thinking of more things that places we can go, things we can do. So anyway, I appreciate that people are putting on the spreadsheet about what time that they're going to be arriving, those that are arriving on Thursday, because need to just coordinate that time to come straight from the airport or wherever you're coming from, right to the apartment, and we'll get the party started.
So for those of you visiting today, we get together multiple times a year in person. We're not just a Zoom club. And so our next service and social is going to be in Kansas City. And if anyone in our club is still thinking of coming, get in touch with Lynette. I don't think it's too late to join the fun, but she'd love to know sooner than later because she's got some things planned and tickets ordered, and it's going to be a great time. And we're doing service at an organization there, and we'll hear from them later in March. So thank you, Lynette, for organizing this great social for our club. And then don't forget, we have future ones coming up, especially put on your calendar our September dates in Minnesota. And that one is a highlight, and everyone loves coming to northern Minnesota in the fall, so don't miss that. And then even next February and May, we have socials in Florida and Alaska. So thanks to everyone for being willing to show us your part of the world. And other ones are being thought about for the future. Anyone can suggest a social in your part of the world. Our upcoming meetings, our next meeting, we're going to hear about our global grant in Colombia, which is very near completion. And then on the last meeting in March, we'll hear about Heart to Heart, which is the organization that we're going to be working with when we're in Kansas City. Our upcoming travel, lots of trips coming up. The one in March, we have 38 people headed to the Amazon. We're so excited. I talked to many people when we were at the Youth Exchange Conference who have been on this trip, and they loved it. They said the food is fantastic, and it was just a highlight experience. So I'm very excited about that. There is a planning meeting or a update meeting coming up. So if you're on the list, you'll know about that. And then you see all the other great trips that we have and activities coming up. If you're going to Calgary and do not have housing yet, one announcement that was made at the Youth Exchange Conference is that either at least one university has opened up housing on campus because there's a lack of hotel rooms. So if you're still struggling to find a hotel room, get in touch and we'll find out how you find out about that university housing. She just announced that, and it was the district governor who is over Calgary. So that's nice if somebody is still wanting to go and doesn't have housing. And then we still made it, even with a long report from Ethiopia, we can make it. So we always end our meeting with the four-way test. And following that, we'll stop recording and end our official meeting. And then board members, please stay on for 10 minutes. So this is a chance for you to unmute. So everyone take your mute off. It's a bit of chaos, but it shows that we're all together in the things we believe in Rotary. So I'll say the first part, and when we get to number one, we all say it together. So the four-way test of the things we think, say, and do. Is it the truth? Is it
It's
fair
fair to all
Fair to all
concerned.
concerned.
Will
Build
build
goodwill
goodwill
and friendships
Be beneficial
beneficial
to
to
all
all
concerned.
concerned.
How wonderful. And I'm sorry if there were any questions that I did not check the chat to see if there are questions. I apologize for that. But thank you again, Jeelan, and all the travelers who went, and everyone have a wonderful week.